Hi, I'm Mike, owner of The In-Groove in Phoenix, Arizona. Today I'm going to go over the best sounding versions of the Doors' self-titled album from early January 1967, recorded in 1966. One of the greatest debut albums of all time from my absolute favorite band of all time. I've got a good stack of about 40 different copies down here, maybe 20 different copies. I weeded some out because I didn't want this video to take an hour and a half. But I'm going to go over the best sounding versions, the copies of this record that you should own. And there's two different versions of this record, essentially. There's a mono and there is a stereo. It originally came out in both formats and subsequently has been released many times in both formats. There is currently today in print a mono and stereo copy of this record. The mono having a different mix. Let's start with the mono. The mono, from the beginning, from the day it came out, is a bad mix. It was not mixed well. There's an inherent distortion in the mono mix of this record that makes this the subpar choice between stereo and mono. Now, I'll also start by saying this is not a very well recorded album. This was recorded on like a really, even for the day, it was a 4-track tape machine. It was relatively primitive. Most studios, I would say at that point in time, were at least recording to 8-track, but they were doing it to 4-track. They used the 3 of the tracks of the 4 to record the band, and they kept that 4th track open for overdubs. So there isn't a lot to be said for the original mix of this album, because there was, you had the drums on one track. I think you had the guitar and keyboard on a track, and then you had Jim Morrison's vocal on a track. So, it was a primitive recording even in the day, and it's not a very great sounding recording. Musically, again, it is one of the absolute greatest debut, if not the greatest debut albums of all time. It's up there like with Jimi Hendrix's debut. I mean, there's very few records that came out of the gate that were this strong. The Rolling Stones, the Beatles, Pink Floyd, they worked up to their masterpieces. And it can be argued that the Doors came out with their masterpiece out of the jump. So, not my favorite Doors album, that would be LA Woman, but it is an absolute masterpiece. Okay, so the mono. The mono in itself is an alternate mix. There's some things going on there, Jim's shouting obscenities, that kind of thing, only available in the mono mix. I will tell you, if you're just looking for a good sounding version of this record, do not buy the mono mix. It is a novelty. It does not sound good in comparison to the stereo. It is flawed from the jump. There's many versions of the mono out there. This is a original Monarch mono. Monarch has kind of a lighter gold label, right? We'll start at the beginning. This is a Presswell, I believe. Let's take a look. Nope, that's a Monarch as well. Maybe that's a Presswell. Let's take a look. But not that this matters too much with the mono because, not that it matters too much with the monos because, again, the original monos of this record are not that good. There's a distortion that's baked into the tape when they made the mono tape to begin with, and it's not the best sounding record to begin with. Now, subsequently, there was a lot of years that went by. It originally only came out in the gold label. A lot of years went by, and then for Record Store Day, they redid it in mono. Then Vinyl Me Please did it in mono. Vinyl Me Please used the Planchen process because at this point in time, whether you're looking at the stereo or the mono, the tapes are in really bad shape. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about that shortly. But the tapes are in really, really bad shape. It's a very popular album. Whether it's the stereo tapes, they were used to death. They probably weren't taken care of that well in the beginning. And subsequently, there's issues. The mono itself, there's issues in the tape. How do I know there's issues in the tape? Well, A, Vinyl Me Please, you had to use the Planchen process to fix some of the issues with the original mono tape. Also, Bruce Botnick has come out and said there's issues with the mono tape to where they actually had to hold their finger over the tape head to get it to play properly. And then, what am I, is that B or C? D, this 450 pounds, it was like $500 version from the Electric Recording Company came out unfutzed with. And being that it was unfutzed with, you could hear how horribly defective at this point in 2023 this tape is. It wasn't good to begin with. It got progressively worse. Don't buy this, by the way. This is an absolute atrocity as far as the amount of money this costs versus how good it sounds. This would be a mistake for you to buy because out of every record I'm going to show you, this is the most expensive of them. And yeah, it's not nearly, I wouldn't even put it in the top half of the records I'm about to show you as far as sonically. But I will say this, I'm not a fan of the Electric Recording Company, but there's one thing that I can look at this and say, this is the absolute most beautiful sleeve reproduction I have ever seen in my entire life. I did an unboxing and review of this. You can go and look at it in depth. I'll link it below. But this sleeve is an absolute work of art. Unbelievable. The original wasn't even half the quality of what this sleeve is. They replicated the original Electra Inner. This to me is the absolute pinnacle of a reproduction on a sleeve. This is, I wish when we were dealing with these really high-end Analog Productions box sets, Mobile Fidelity one-step box sets, any super premium product, if we could get those super premium products with this quality of a sleeve, right, but with, in my opinion, much better mastering, that would be just the absolute pinnacle of what is achievable. If it was up to me, which it's not, of course, that would be the way I'd be doing it. If I was Analog Productions, I'd be using this jacket, style of jacket, with my record manufacturing process, because this is, I can't speak more highly of the quality of this cover. This is unbelievable. Okay, so if I was to do a monocopy, if you had to own a monocopy, I would actually pick up the Vinyl Me Please. It was done by Bernie Grundman. It's digital. It was fixed via the Plangent process. More, you can, it's a way of essentially locking on to the tape's bias and correcting wow and flutter and fixing issues with the tape, present in the tape, in the digital domain. It did wonders in fixing the warts on the original mono, and it got it almost listenable. But again, the record store day, nothing. Don't buy the mono unless you just are like a degenerate fan like myself and you need to own them all. I actually had those at the shop, so I don't have them to show you. But again, the Vinyl Me Please for the mono. If you're going to choose the Vinyl Me Please. Okay, let's start talking about some original pressings. Now, I left off a lot of the European records, not showing you those because they're not that good. Again, this is not a very good sounding record to begin with. Primitive recording. The European copies, the German, UK, that kind of stuff, not very good. But what I wanted to start off and showing you is the Japanese stuff. And the reason being, everybody loves their Japanese records. Japanese, the cover is amazing. It's quiet. These are 3 Japanese pressings. I think it's 72, 74, and maybe 78 or 80. So this is a grip of Japanese pressings. Not that good. They all are on the Butterfly label, which would have been the second label for this record. It went gold label, excuse me, this would be the third. It went gold label, red label with the big E. It went Butterfly label, then it went back to a red label as well. I would say out of the 3 of these, oddly enough, the middle pressing to me was just not that good. It's anemic. This is a record where the mastering actually is the 4th member of the band. The mastering choices on this record between the different pressings make the record what it is. And The mastering choices on all three of these are poor. I'm not a fan of Japanese pressings. I own them. The reason I'm showing them to you is because I feel inclined to show you a bunch of Japanese pressings. This way, when I tell you that they're not any good, you don't think I'm just pulling rabbits here. I've got them. I listen to them. I collect them, in a sense, for my favorite albums. I'm going to keep them on the shelf. I have no plans on selling this, but it's not that good. This particular album, done by the Japanese, very bland. It's anemic sounding. That's the problem with all these. But if you're going to have one, I would say this is the better of the three, and this is by far and away the worst of the three. But yeah, not my go-tos. I mean, if I had to own 5 copies, one of those wouldn't be it. Okay, now let's get into the litany of American pressings. I left some stuff off of this video. The later 80s stuff, the 80s, the Electro 80s, the Butterfly label, the Big E, all the stuff throughout the 70s is not that good. At that point in time, I feel like they were probably making those records from a copy of a copy. We were talking multiple generations down. The tape quality, I'd imagine, wasn't that good. Either that or the mastering was pretty poor. But I'm not really a fan of any of that 70s era US pressings. What I will show you, and this is kind of where I'll start the list from the worst to the best, this is the first, well, all of these are first gold label. These are gold label first pressings, stereos, from different pressing plants. Now, is that Allentown? Or is that Allentown? Let's go through some of the various pressings. I would kind of lump all these together. Although this record was done a lot. It was mastered a lot. It was manufactured a lot. There's some variance between all of these. But essentially what I'm showing here is this is everything from all the different pressing plants. I would kind of lump into this category, except for the Monarch pressing plant. Monarch is signified with an MON in the dead wax or an MR and a circle in the dead wax. Monarch was a pressing plant in LA. But these originals are significantly better. This is non-Monarch originals. I'll lump the rest in. Anything but Monarch is in my hand here. These are all significantly better than all the stuff that came after. It was interesting in the sense that this record got progressively worse as the years went on. They probably started mastering from lower generations. The mastering engineers just didn't care as much anymore. They just got worse. A lot of also with this record, it is, a lot of the issues with this record too is this was a record that people played to death. So you really got to work at finding clean copies of this. But what are we at here? 1, 2, 3, 4. So I put this on, like if I was to do top 5, this would be number 5, these gold label non-Monarch originals. Mobile Fidelity did this from the original master tape. Subsequently, as of now, the master tape, the original master tape, is in such bad shape it is not going to be used anymore. At this point, it is like an artifact. It is unusable or said to be unusable. And things that are being done from tape now are being done from a safety. A safety is when you take the master tape and you make a copy of it. Apparently, and that's generally done when the record is made for the very first time. And as the years go on, they might make more safeties. But there's pressings now in print that are being manufactured from the safety. The original is not usable. But at this point in time, this is a first generation from the very original iteration of Mobile Fidelity, where everything was on JVC Super Vinyl. This is cut from the original master tape. This is a very anemic sounding record. Again, when I mentioned that the mastering engineer is almost the 4th member of this band, the best sounding copies of this, Jim comes out of your speakers and shouts in your face, break on through to the other side. He's in your face, he's in your grill, and he's yelling and screaming at you. This is polite. And that's the problem with the Mobile Fidelity. You almost want to just, snap your fingers and like you're at a piano on a piano bar, like a cocktail lounge, and you're just, yeah, come on, baby, like Jose Feliciano. It kind of has that vibe. It is not the way this record was intended to sound. I've heard this record 1,000 times. This is too polite, too anemic, too balanced. The instruments are all nice and clear, but they're just very linear on the sound stage. It doesn't have, Robbie's guitar on Break On Through, that bass slide. It doesn't jump out at you. It's just very mundane. I don't really recommend this, but because of the ease of getting a nice clean copy of this, I'll put this above the gold originals, but it's really a preference at that point. But I think most of you watching this aren't going to want to have to buy 20 copies of the gold label to find yourself a good one. You're probably better off just buying something like this, but for less money, I can get you a better record. All right, up next, this is Analog Productions' 45 RPM version of the album. Now, this is made from a safety copy of the tape, not the original master tape, but it is all analog. It is mastered by Doug Sax. This doesn't have the polite sound of the Mobile Fidelity. It has more of the gritty, in-your-face sound of the original, but I will tell you this, there's something lost in that safety tape, and mostly I would assume that what I would say is missing is the high end. It has a very dull high end. The high end frequencies at this point in time, they're just gone. They're not completely gone, but they're just heavily diminished. When John Densmore is playing that drum and he's doing tapping, certain versions of this record, when he's tapping on the ride, it has a very nice ring. It's just comes through. He's playing the ride cymbal. It's nice when he's working the brass on Break On Through. Has a beautiful bossa nova sound that just rolls out of your speakers. That's missing on this. Although the bass is phenomenal, it's well defined, it's very dynamic. The dynamic range on it is great. Also, this is in print. It's $60. It's reasonable. There's other records that are in print. There's the modern Bernie Grundman, the Rhino reissue. Stay away from all of them. They're not that good. Again, this is a record that is not that good to begin with and has gotten progressively worse, it seems, over time, the condition of the tape and the presentation of the record. But I will say, this is the in-print go-to copy. It's reasonable. It's $60. Analog Productions did the whole catalog. I did a shootout of LA Woman. LA Woman is the definitive version of the record in this catalog, but this isn't. I'm going to put this at third. It's good, better than most, but there's still better out there. Okay, my second favorite copy of this record. This is the DCC version from, I want to say, the mid-90s, maybe 94, 95. Let's see if there's a date on this. This was done by Steve Hoffman and Kevin Gray. Way back in the 90s, right? They're numbered. This is number 1640. They're at 33 RPM. This was the last time that the analog tape was used to manufacture this album, the original analog master tape, in an all-analog pressing. It really only had been done on the stuff throughout the 60s, 70s, but as far as being the original analog master tape, probably the first pressing. Never really know. Maybe they were using a dub copy, but the Mobile Fidelity and the DCC. This is my second favorite go-to copy of this record. This has, at this point in time, the high frequencies on this are there, and they're great. Sounds great. What it doesn't have is that visceral, in-your-face, Jim Morrison screaming in your face sound. It just doesn't have it. It's more polite. It's really good. It has a great dynamic range. It has great high end, low end. I mean, it's doesn't have the low end of the 45, but it is a more well-rounded record. and it's also better sounding at 33. There's something to be said for that because you got to get up half as much. If it was better sounding at 45, you put up with it. But at this point, I think this is my second favorite copy of this record. Okay, second favorite copy of the record. Problem with this record is it's very expensive now. There was a point in time, it seemed like for a lot of years, this was around a $100 record. I think the last copy of this I saw changing hands was in that $300 range. So it's gone up quite a bit. And that is what makes this next choice a little bit more easy to recommend, although you're going to have to work very hard to find it. So oddly enough, there's really only one way to listen to this record. There is all of this that I showed you, mono, stereo, they're all like okay. It's like The Doors, it's Jim, Light My Fire, Good Times, right? But then there's the one unicorn pressing that's like it was made using magic. Magic mix, magic mastering, magic all around, because it is absolutely, unbelievably, significantly, positively better than all of this other stuff. And it makes all this other stuff over here crap that you don't ever want to listen to because it's so good. What is it? Well, that is the original gold label Monarch pressing. Monarch again. Now, you're saying to me, Mike, how could a pressing plant make the difference? My assumption is this was mastered for them separately than these other original gold label plants from back in the day. The sound on this is significantly different than those other copies. It is quite possible that because Monarch was close and they wanted to get it at least to the local market quickly, they took that master tape, it was mastered, it was done, press played it at Monarch, and they started cracking them out there first. They possibly sent a dub copy or something else out to other pressing plants around the country, and they manufactured from that. Whoever mastered the Monarch pressing of this, whatever they did, however they did it, is effing magic, because it is so much better than everything else. I'm telling you, when I put this thing on and Jim starts singing Break On Through, like I'm checking my face for spit, because it is in your face. It's kind of like the Doors movie, where he leans into the camera, although that didn't really happen on Ed Sullivan, but he leans into the camera and says, "Light my fire," before they got kicked off the Ed Sullivan Show. If you watch the real video, that shot doesn't really exist. But it feels like that listening to this record. It is unbelievable. I don't know what the hell they did. I don't know how they did it. Now, I will tell you this. It's a little bit louder, and it seems like it's got a little bit more compression on it. I'm not a mastering engineer, but that's what I'm going to assume. It's got a little bit more compression. It's a little bit louder. But what it has is beautiful dynamic range. Ray's Vox Continental, when he starts playing that, it's gritty. Almost to the point of distorting out, but not quite. The bass on Robbie's guitar, because keep in mind, he's playing that on Break On Through. He's got that bass slide on the lower E. I mean, it's almost three-dimensional, and it just hits you. It's truly amazing. I mean, I spent a lot of time, I really it's easier to gauge a DCC and analog productions, but when you're dealing with these early copies from pressing plants all around the United States, you're going to get records that are done a little bit better than the others, right? So I'm expecting that. I'm expected to look at all these gold labels, and it's like, okay, maybe, this particular record was made when the plant was running at its peak efficiency, early in the stamper. There's all kinds of little anomalies when you manufacture a record that can make a version a little bit better than maybe the same record plant the next day. So I'm going back and forth, and I'm listening to these different pressing plants from every place but Monarch, and they're kind of all in that same vein. Like, some copies are in better shape than others, so you're accounting for that, but they're all kind of like in that realm of the same. But then you put the Monarch on, and it's like, holy hell, what happened here? How did this end up so much better than all these other copies? Now, I don't think we'll ever know, but it's clearly better. It's clearly mastered differently. It is hotter. It's different. It's not in the same ballpark as the rest of those. Now, many times when you're dealing with Columbia or these other plants, I would imagine like Columbia, for instance, all the mastering was more than likely done at the same place, it would seem, from what we know at this point, and then the metalwork was sent to different plants around the country. Not the case here. We'll never really truly know, but it's guesswork. It's like Vinyl Detective at this point. We can kind of surmise and guess what happened. We don't really know. I've watched many interviews with Bernie Grundman, and he alluded to actually mastering. I'm almost positive he alluded to mastering a Doors album back in the day. Didn't know what it was. Back then, mastering engineers, for the most part, didn't initial a record. But I could have swore he talked about, I'll have to try to find that interview. Maybe he did this record. We don't know. That would have been earlier on in his career. Don't know what the magic is in the Monarch, but that's what you want. The Monarch has a slightly different color label as well. They're all gold, but it's a shiny gold. Some of them are more of like a burnt gold. But I don't know how well this is going to show up on camera. Let's see if I can, maybe you guys can zoom in on this. Kind of has a different tint to it. But again, look for the MR in the dead wax. That's the one you want. I mean, it is, and I've got multiple Monarchs. You know, all the early gold label Monarchs, they're in a whole nother league. So that is it. Again, this is a little bit more difficult of a shootout in the sense that a lot of these aren't that good. So it's like you're deciding what sucks less than the other, while simultaneously realizing that the music that's in these grooves is some of the best rock and roll absolutely ever recorded. So again, to recap, find yourself a clean Monarch. You can find clean Monarchs for $300 to $500. The amount of money you'll pay for a clean Monarch versus that DCC will give you much more enjoyment than the DCC, although the DCC will be easy to find. It's an audiophile record. You're going to go online. You're going to find somebody who has one. It's more than likely going to be clean, near mint, played a couple of times. Done. When it comes to that Monarch, they're mostly beat. They're mostly destroyed. You're going to be buying many copies from people who claim to have mint copies, and they don't because the grooves have been chewed. You know the drill if you're buying old 60s records from people online. Almost always overgraded and never as advertised. But if you find that one that's real nice and clean, you're going to be happy. On a side note, you can find pretty beat up copies of that record for 50, 60 bucks. I would rather listen to a relatively beat up copy of that record, maybe like VG, than anything else because it is that much better. All right, guys, you could check us out online at theingroove.com. Until next time.